Week 5, Sample Unit Plan. I have created a sample unit plan to show you a completed Project 5, and in this brief video I'd like to just walk through that and make a few comments about how I put it together. So this is my completed sample Project 5. The file name is Greer Project 5. I will link to it in several places, including the Project 5 forum, so you can find this. And let me just briefly show you what I have done and talk a little bit about how I put this together. This 4-week learning unit plan is based on a real project that I have done in tech writing, the course called RET 3326. And it says here the students, students in that field are basically non-majors. They mostly come from disciplines like nursing, engineering, computer science, information science, and related disciplines. Some of them have a secondary major in professional technical writing, but they're mostly people who are taking this course because it's required of their discipline. And so given that, and given who the students are in the class, I work very hard to do what Dirksen says about the real world relevance. I really try to connect what we do in the course to what they're going to have to actually do in their profession and in their workplace. So this is based on a project that I have done a couple times before, and now that we are looking at course design, I'm taking this opportunity to revise the unit based on the kinds of things we're talking about here in RET 7372 and what I'm learning from you guys about instructional design as we work through these projects. So I can see a number of ways to improve the project. The project itself, the end point of the 4-week learning unit, in this case, is a proposal. And most of you know from having taken courses like this, a proposal is a very common workplace document that proposes a solution to a problem. So it's a very typical genre that people really have to write in the real world. You have to write proposals of various types at work all the time. So the real world relevance factor is very high. There are two added degrees of difficulty with this project. Number one is that it's not just a written proposal, it's a proposal in the form of an infographic. So the students are writing a multimodal project themselves, as are your students. So it has multimodality built into it. And the second added layer of challenge is that it's a group project, not an individual project. I had assigned the students in groups of 4 to work together. So they have to do a proposal as an infographic, working as a group. So there's a lot of moving parts with this project. It's fairly complex. And this is a project that was the last main project for the course. I would never do something this complex at the beginning. There's too much prior knowledge that's required in terms of rhetoric and the rhetorical situation. So we are basically doing this weeks 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 at the end of a 16-week semester. So this is the last part of the course. So we've built up a lot of common language and common context that is useful. The project itself is based on a kind of scenario. So there's actually a little bit of a role-playing game project here that I actually defined a scenario, and you can read it in the sample document, but it's basically that your supervisor is unhappy with the level of writing and communication among employees in your department. So basically your group, the students group, has been charged by a supervisor to come up with some kind of a solution to the fact that there are all these problems going on with workplace communication. And I had a lot of nurses in the class, and I asked them, does this seem realistic to you? And they said, totally. We have all kinds of problems with communication, with patient handoff, shift changes. So they immediately bought into this project and said, yes, this is something that really happens in our workplace a lot. So basically, the students were assigned to become kind of the workplace communication task force and to write a problem solution model proposal based on this problem of how can we improve the quality and effectiveness of communication in our workplace. So that's some context for you about who the students were, where we were in the class at the time, and what the main project is that they were working on during this 4-week unit. So from that point, I define my 3 main unit goals for the 4-week unit as a whole. Number 1, compose a proposal for a workplace audience that defines a problem and proposes a solution. So that's kind of like the number 1 bullet point learning goal for the whole thing. You're going to come away with this having completed a proposal. Number 2, apply basic principles of page layout and information design to deliver the proposal in the form of an infographic. So that gets that second bullet point, that learning goal gets at the multimodality part, that we are doing a proposal based in the principles of layout and information design to deliver it as an infographic, not a straight text document. And third, construct and apply an effective process for collaborating to develop your proposal as a group. So that's the group collaboration piece. So those are the 3 main learning goals. So from there, and this is something I addressed in a previous video, from there I defined these 4 weekly goals. So the way I do this is I start here. I start with the weekly learning objectives and say, okay, given that we want to get here at the end of the 4 weeks, how am I going to break that down? So here are my weekly goals. I won't read them, but I do encourage you to take a look at these. I tried to break it down and think about what do we need to do and what do students need to get across those learning gaps week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. So you can see how I wrote this, and I tried to keep in mind, okay, we have to work on the proposal, we have to work on the infographic, we have to work on the group project each week. So once I did that work to define these weekly goals, the rest of it was quite simple. I've done it. I've actually done this full project this morning. It took me less than an hour once I had defined these weekly learning goals, learning objectives. So the piece that I added this morning was to go kind of week by week. Once I've defined my goals across the top row, I then work column by column to do each week one at a time. And I work vertically down the column. So I look at week 1 and I say, okay, here's these goals. Define proposal as a genre of workplace writing. Evaluate sample proposals using concept of audience, purpose, and rhetorical situation. Define infographic as a medium for delivering workplace communication, and explain the characteristics of successful working groups. So I think to myself, okay, those are the objectives. How do we get there? So that's where I layer in instructional content, activities, assessments and assignments, and then additional resources. So in this case, the instructional content. Okay, first we better define. So basic overview of the proposal as a workplace genre. So that's a piece of text on the course website. Number 2, walkthrough of a sample proposal. Let's give them an example and do some show and tell. So as it says here, this will be a short text plus a video to be described in the media section later. So I know I'm going to use multimedia to do a walkthrough video, much like I'm doing right now with you guys. And then I also wanted to introduce strategies for effective workplace teams. So that's the basic content that I am going to present to the students. Then the activities, what are the students going to do? Well, each week there's going to be a discussion forum and a project listed under assessments and assignments. So in this case, the discussion forum, I want the students to share. I'm going to put them into groups, and then the week 1 activity is a discussion forum to share common problems in workplace communication in your field. Work with group members to plan how to complete the group project and assign group roles. So this is the first time this group has worked together. So this is very basic. I want them just doing some brainstorming. What are common problems you encounter as nurses in your workplace communication? And what is the strategy that your group wants to use to work together? So I wanted the group to basically assign some group roles. I wanted somebody to be a project manager, somebody to be a secretary, and to work within the group itself to define those roles. So that's what they're doing on the discussion forum. And then the project, the deliverable for the end of this week, is that they're going to produce an analysis of a sample proposal. So at this point, the students are not yet composing their own proposal. They're just looking at a sample and looking at the characteristics and rhetorical situation of a sample proposal in order to produce this analysis. So the output, the deliverable, is project 1, analysis of a sample proposal. And then I think finally, in terms of resources, what is the background information that they're going to need? So some sample proposals, obviously they need to look at some. We were using a textbook, so there was a chapter on writing proposals that I provided. Then a link to PictoChart, which is this tool that we were using. It's really cool. You might want to use it. Here's what it looks like. It's just pictochart.com, easy to use infographic maker. And so I linked to that and said, take a look at this and get an idea of what infographics are and what tools we can use to make one in PictoChart. And then this online reading called Forming, Storming, Norming, Understanding the Strategies of Team Formation, which looks like this. This is from a website called Mind Tools, Essential Skills for an Excellent Career. I think I just did a Google search and found this, and I thought it was really good. It has a video, and the forming, storming, norming, and performing is a typical rubric that people use for talking about workplace communication in groups. So those are the resources. So that's what I do for each week. Is I just look at the goals, remind myself, all right, what did I say we're going to be doing this week? What are the objectives? And then how do we get there in terms of what is the content I provide the students? What activities are they going to do? I think of activities usually as a discussion forum or other informal work, and then assessments and assignments as the projects and formal deliverables, and then the resources. And then I do that for each week. And again, like I said, this took about an hour. I've had some practice. It may take you longer than that, but don't make it harder than it needs to be. Just chunk the content out. This is just a working outline. It's a plan. You don't try to write the whole thing in this chart. Just make notes to yourself to say, all right, what do I need to cover each week? And how am I going to build this thing? And then obviously we're going to spend weeks 7 and 8 of the course actually building out your learning unit in Google Sites to practice some online writing and design. So each week there. Now you'll notice one other thing in terms of the trajectory of the 4-week unit as a whole. So here's the endpoint. Project 4, final proposal due, to be delivered in the form of an infographic. So I like to give them that last week as working time. So you'll notice that the amount of readings and resources dwindles. Week 1, there's a lot because this is all new. Week 2, there's still kind of a lot. There's three things here under resources. Week 2, less, and then week 3, there's less, and week 4, there's nothing. So by week 4, I want them focusing on their own project, not doing a bunch of background reading. So we start with a lot of background reading, then a little bit less, then a little bit less, and then none. So there's a trajectory from focusing on external content to focusing on their own work. I find that works really well to kind of scaffold the way students are working and devoting their time and attention. I think of these 4-week units and a course syllabus as a whole, it's a kind of choreography. You're really thinking about what you're asking students to spend their time and attention on. And of course, in an online course, as you well know, student time and attention is a very scarce, limited resource. And so you want to make the most of that. And I think that mapping out an effective learning unit plan is the best way to do that. It helps you strategize and say, what can I do as a time-challenged instructor who may be teaching 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 sections at a time? You want to map out a plan that's going to be achievable for you. And then you want to map out a strategy for your students that's going to give them a lot of support, but also allow them to, to do the work. I always think of, for an undergraduate 3-unit semester course, I think that the most that they're going to have to spend is maybe 3 to 4 hours per week. So this unit is designed assuming that that's about how much time they have. And by the time I had taught this course, I had calibrated that pretty well, and the students said, yeah, the workload was pretty realistic and pretty reasonable. So some background about how I think about these tools. Then, of course, next week, week 6, we will look at adding multimedia accessibility and mobility into our plan and developing the lower part of this grid, which is grayed out. So more to come on that. But that's my sample. That's a little bit of the thought process that went into making that. I hope that's helpful for you. Thanks for listening.